I'd like to make a withdrawal, please.
Brenda Calloway didn't touch the keyboard. She crossed her arms. You want a what? She looked Whitney up and down like she was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Shut your mouth. Listen carefully.
People like you don't have money in a place like this. You belong on a bus somewhere.
Someone in line pulled out their phone. Recording,
Oh, wow.
not helping.
This is about to go viral.
A man in a suit looked over, shrugged, looked away.
Get out of my line!
Brenda pointed at the door.
Before I have you removed.
The lobby watched. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Whitney stood completely still, but every single one of them was about to watch the most humiliating reversal of their lives. To understand why what happened that morning hit so hard, you need to understand who Whitney Evans actually is. Not who Brenda assumed she was, who she actually is.
Whitney grew up in Vine City, Atlanta, West Side, the kind of neighborhood where the corner store had bulletproof glass on the windows and the school library had 3 computers for 400 kids. Her mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry. Her father drove a city bus for 22 years. They weren't poor in spirit, but money was always thin, always careful, always counted twice. Whitney watched her parents work themselves to exhaustion for a life that still felt just out of reach. And she made a decision at 16 that would define everything that came after. She was going to build something they couldn't take away. She graduated top of her class, full scholarship to Spelman College, then a master's in finance from Wharton. Not because doors were open, they weren't. She pushed through walls that weren't designed to move for people who looked like her. At 29, she founded Elevation Capital Group with $40,000 in savings, a second-hand desk, and 2 clients who believed in her before she had a track record to show them. She worked 16-hour days. She made mistakes. She lost a deal in year 2 that almost broke the company. She rebuilt it. By the time she turned 40, Elevation Capital Group was managing over $2.3 billion in assets. Infrastructure investments, healthcare, renewable energy, real estate development in underserved communities that the big firms ignored because the margins weren't flashy enough. Forbes named her one of the most influential financial executives in the Southeast. Twice. She bought her mother a house in Buckhead, paid it off in full, cash. But here's the thing about Whitney Evans that nobody in that bank lobby understood. The thing that made what was about to happen both devastating and deeply ironic. She didn't live like her net worth. Deliberately. No entourage, no assistant trailing behind her with a tablet, no chauffeured car idling at the curb. She drove herself. A slate gray sedan, clean but unremarkable. She wore a structured blazer, dark slacks, minimal jewelry, a single leather portfolio under her arm. She dressed for work, not for performance. She'd learned early that when a black woman walks into a room draped in signals of wealth, people find other ways to dismiss her. So she stopped performing. She simply arrived and let her presence and her paperwork do the talking. That Tuesday morning, she left her office at 10:20 a.m. The drive to Premier Trust Bank took 11 minutes. She parked herself, fed the meter herself, walked through the front door herself. The lobby was everything the address promised. Marble floors the color of cream and smoke. A vaulted ceiling with recessed lighting that made everyone look like they were being professionally photographed. Soft jazz drifting from invisible speakers. The faint smell of fresh flowers, white lilies in a tall vase near the entrance. 2 tellers were working. A third was on the phone. The line had 4 people ahead of Whitney. She took her place without a word, portfolio tucked under her arm, eyes forward. She wasn't there for a scene. She was there for $30,000. A withdrawal she made every single year, in cash, anonymously, delivered personally to the West Side Community Foundation. No press, no tax deduction, just money going back to the streets that built her. She'd been a client of Premier Trust for 11 years. Her personal account alone held over $4 million. Her corporate accounts pushed the total past $14 million. She had never once had a problem at this branch. She waited in line like everyone else, politely, quietly, patiently. The man ahead of her was served in 4 minutes. The woman before him, 3. Then it was Whitney's turn. She stepped up to window 3. Brenda Calloway looked up, and something behind those eyes, something practiced, something ugly, something that had probably been there for years, decided, in the space of 2 seconds, exactly who Whitney Evans was. She was wrong. But that mistake was already in motion, and it was going to cost everyone in that building far more than they could imagine. Brenda didn't touch the keyboard, not immediately. She just looked at Whitney the way some people look at something they've already decided doesn't belong, like the decision was made before a single word was exchanged. Whitney placed her account card on the counter. Calm, practiced, the same way she'd done it dozens of times before. I'd like to make a cash withdrawal. $30,000 from my personal account, please. Brenda picked up the card, held it at an angle, like she was examining a suspicious coupon. Then she set it down and began typing. Slowly. The kind of slow that isn't about being careful. It's about sending a message. A full minute passed. The teller at window 2 finished a transaction, smiled at her customer, handed back a receipt. Normal, efficient, warm. Whitney watched it from the corner of her eye and said nothing. Brenda stopped typing, picked up the phone at her station, spoke in a low voice, hand half cupped over the receiver, set it back down, then looked up at Whitney with a smile that had no warmth anywhere inside it. I'm going to need you to step aside, ma'am. The system is flagging your account for unusual activity. Whitney kept her voice even. What kind of unusual activity? I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics. You'll need to wait while we verify. I've held this account for 11 years. What exactly requires verification? Brenda's smile didn't move. Ma'am, step aside, please. There are other customers waiting. Whitney glanced behind her. There was one person in line. He was checking his phone. He was not waiting urgently. She turned back to Brenda and stayed exactly where she was. I'd prefer to resolve this here, at the window. Can you tell me who you called? I called my manager, as per protocol. Brenda crossed her arms just slightly. This is a high-value account request. These things take time. They didn't take time for the gentleman before me. Something flickered across Brenda's face. Not guilt. Annoyance. Like Whitney had just said something impolite by pointing out the obvious. She didn't respond. She just turned back to her screen and began typing again. Slowly. Again. Whitney stood still. The jazz overhead kept playing. Someone near the entrance laughed at something on their phone. The white lilies in the vase by the door were starting to lose a petal. It drifted down to the marble floor without a sound. 2 minutes later, footsteps crossed the lobby. Confident, unhurried footsteps. The kind that come with a lanyard and a title. Douglas Hartley was 52 years old, broad-shouldered, with silver hair swept neatly to one side. He wore a navy suit with a pocket square that matched nothing and a smile that had been professionally maintained for 3 decades. Branch manager, 14 years at this location. He walked like a man who had never once in his career been wrong about anything. He stopped at Brenda's window, looked at Brenda first, said something to her quietly. She nodded toward Whitney. Only then did Hartley turn and acknowledge Whitney's existence. The way you acknowledge a piece of furniture you've just noticed is in the wrong room. "Can I help you with something?" he said. Not unkindly, just completely without recognition, like she was a walk-in, like her name wasn't on a $14 million account 2 keystrokes away. "Yes," Whitney said. "I came in to make a standard withdrawal. $30,000 from my personal account. I've been told there's unusual activity on the account, but no one has explained what that means or shown me any documentation supporting that claim." Hartley clasped his hands together, nodded slowly, the way men in his position nod when they're deciding how much to tell you. "I understand your frustration, Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans. For a cash withdrawal of this size, our policy requires additional verification steps. 2 forms of government-issued ID, a proof of address dated within 60 days, and a brief explanation of the intended purpose of the withdrawal." Whitney looked at him steadily. "Is that policy applied to all customers requesting withdrawals of this amount?" "For transactions of this nature, yes. The man before me made a comparable transaction. I watched it. He was asked for 1 form of ID. That was all." Hartley's smile held. Barely. "Every transaction is assessed individually based on account history and risk profile." "And what in my account history triggered this assessment?" He paused just a half-second too long. "Our systems flagged it automatically. It's nothing personal, Ms. Evans." "Then you won't mind showing me the system flag? In writing?" The smile finally slipped. Just at the edges. He looked at Brenda. Brenda looked at her screen. Neither of them produced anything in writing. Across the lobby, a woman in her early 30s sat in one of the waiting chairs near the consultation desks. Her name was Simone. She had an appointment with a financial advisor in 8 minutes. She had been watching this interaction since Hartley walked over. Something about it made the back of her neck go tight. She shifted in her seat, glanced down at her phone. Then, slowly, quietly, she angled the camera up and pressed record. She didn't make it obvious, but she didn't look away either. Back at the window, Hartley had made a decision. Whitney could see it in the way his posture changed. The slight squaring of the shoulders, the drop in his voice that meant he was no longer trying to be diplomatic. "Ms. Evans, I'm going to need to ask you to come with me to a private office so we can sort this out properly." "I'm at a teller window. I'm a customer. I haven't done anything that requires a private office." "It's standard procedure for situations like this." "What situations specifically?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, the kind that's meant for someone else. Whitney caught it. She turned slightly and saw Carl Norris, the security guard, push off from the wall where he'd been standing and begin walking toward her. Unhurried, like this was routine, like she was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be served. Carl was 6 feet tall, broad, in a pressed gray uniform. He stopped 2 feet to Whitney's left and said in a flat, professional tone, "Ma'am, if you'll just follow Mr. Hartley." "I will not." Whitney's voice was quiet, completely steady, not aggressive, just immovable. "I am a customer of this bank. I am standing at a teller window. I have broken no rule, violated no policy, and raised no disturbance. I will not be escorted anywhere." The lobby had gone quiet. Not the polite quiet of a professional space, the held breath quiet of people watching something they know is wrong, but haven't decided what to do about yet. The man who'd been behind Whitney in line had stopped looking at his phone. The teller at window 2 had stopped pretending to type. Even the jazz seemed to fade. Or maybe it was just that everything else got louder. Brenda, emboldened by Hartley's presence and Carl's position, leaned forward and said it flatly, like she was reading from a script she'd written herself years ago. The account shows no record of a withdrawal request of this size. It doesn't match the profile of the individual presenting at the window. Whitney turned and looked directly at Brenda. Say that again? Brenda didn't blink. The account profile doesn't match you. 4 words, chosen carefully, meaning something very specific. Everyone in earshot understood exactly what she meant. The man near the door understood. Simone from across the lobby understood, and her hand tightened around her phone. Whitney took one slow breath. She placed both hands flat on the counter, portfolio between them, and she said in a voice that was perfectly, almost unnervingly calm, "I would like to present my identification now. I am going to open my portfolio. I am asking permission so that no one in this lobby can claim they felt threatened." She looked at Carl. Carl looked at Hartley. Hartley looked at the counter. Nobody stopped her. Whitney reached into the portfolio, and everything that Brenda Calloway and Douglas Hartley thought they knew about this moment, about this woman, about who held power in this lobby, about how this day was going to end, was about to come apart at the seams. Whitney opened the portfolio slowly, removed her driver's license, placed it on the counter without a word. Brenda picked it up, looked at it, set it back down with 2 fingers, the way you handle something you'd rather not touch. This alone isn't sufficient. We need 2 forms of government-issued ID, proof of address, and a stated purpose for the withdrawal, as Mr. Hartley explained. I have all of that. Whitney reached back into the portfolio. And we'll also need time to verify each document independently. Brenda's voice had taken on a new texture now, smoother, more deliberate, like she was reading from a policy manual she'd memorized specifically for this moment. This could take some time. You're welcome to wait. Over there. She gestured toward a row of chairs against the far wall, the ones near the exit, the ones that said, "You are not important enough to stand here." Whitney didn't move toward the chairs. Hartley stepped closer, not threateningly, but close enough that it was meant to be felt. "Ms. Evans, I want to resolve this quickly and professionally, but I need your cooperation." "You have my cooperation. I'm standing here, I'm providing documents, I'm speaking calmly. What I won't do is move to a corner and wait indefinitely while you manufacture reasons to deny a legal request." Something shifted in Hartley's face. The professional warmth, the practiced, polished veneer he'd spent 30 years building, cracked just slightly. What came through underneath wasn't anger exactly. It was something colder. The particular expression of a man who isn't used to being pushed back on, especially not here, especially not by someone who looked like Whitney. He leaned in and lowered his voice, not for privacy, for effect. "Ms. Evans, I'll be direct. Our fraud detection system has flagged this account. I have a responsibility to this institution to take that seriously. If you refuse to follow our verification procedures, I have no choice but to escalate this matter." Escalate it how? He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. "I'll need to contact law enforcement." The word hung in the air like smoke. Law enforcement. For a woman standing quietly at a teller window, with a portfolio full of documentation, who had raised her voice exactly 0 times. Simone, from her chair across the lobby, caught every word. Her thumb pressed harder against the side of her phone. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just kept the camera steady and her expression neutral, and her eyes wide open. The man near the door, the one in the gray suit who'd been watching since the beginning, finally looked away. He studied his shoes. He found something extremely interesting about the marble floor. He was not going to get involved. That much was clear. Whitney looked at Hartley for a long moment. You're going to call the police. On a customer. At a teller window. Because she asked to withdraw money from her own account. I'm going to call for assistance in managing a situation that has become uncooperative. I am not being uncooperative. I am asking questions. Those are not the same thing. Hartley was already reaching for the phone. He spoke briefly, set it down, straightened his pocket square, then turned back to Whitney with the particular calm of a man who believes he has just won something. Whitney didn't react. She stood exactly where she had been standing since the beginning. Feet planted, portfolio open, documents on the counter, hands visible. She was not going to give anyone a reason. Not today, not in this lobby, not with two officers about to walk through that door. She knew how this worked. She had known since she was 16 years old, since Vine City, since every room she'd ever entered where someone decided before she opened her mouth that she was a problem. She knew the math of it. She knew what happened when a black woman moved too fast, or spoke too loud, or looked too directly at the wrong person in the wrong moment. So she stood, completely, perfectly, almost painfully still. And she waited. 2 minutes passed. The jazz overhead kept playing. A phone rang somewhere behind the teller wall and was answered immediately, professionally, cheerfully. The white lilies by the entrance had lost another petal. It lay on the marble floor now, small and pale and completely ignored. Then the front door opened. 2 officers walked in, not rushing, not with hands on anything, just present, which was the point. Their presence was the message. Uniform, badge, authority. Walking through the door of a place where nothing illegal had happened and nobody had been hurt because a bank manager had made a phone call. The officers approached. The younger one, maybe late 20s, scanned the room with the slightly uncomfortable expression of someone who isn't sure yet what they've walked into. The older one had the practiced blankness of a man who had responded to enough of these calls to know that assistance requested can mean almost anything. Hartley moved to intercept them before they reached the window. He spoke quickly, quietly, with the confidence of someone who expected to be believed without question. Whitney couldn't hear every word, but she heard enough. Refusing to comply? Potential fraudulent access. Won't follow standard procedure. The older officer nodded. They both walked toward Whitney. Ma'am, is there a problem here? Whitney looked at him directly, clearly. Yes. I came into this bank to make a legal cash withdrawal from my personal account. I have been denied without documented cause, accused of fraud without evidence, and now law enforcement has been called. Not because I was threatening or disruptive, but because I asked for an explanation and didn't move when I was told to. The officer glanced at Hartley. Hartley said smoothly, "She's been uncooperative with our verification process, and we have reason to believe the account she's attempting to access may be fraudulent." Whitney turned back to the officer. Her voice was measured and precise. "I have identification. I have documentation. I have not raised my voice, made any threat, or violated any law. I would like to present my materials now, if I'm permitted to do so." The officer looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Go ahead, ma'am." Hartley stiffened. Brenda's arms crossed tighter. Whitney reached into the portfolio again. She removed her driver's license, already on the counter, her passport, her proof of address, each one placed down cleanly, without drama, without performance. Brenda examined each document with theatrical skepticism. She turned them over slowly, held the passport up slightly like she was checking for watermarks, then set it down and looked at Hartley rather than Whitney, as if Whitney were a file to be processed, not a person standing 3 feet away. "These still don't explain the fraud flag on the account," Brenda said, addressing Hartley directly. Her voice had the practiced certainty of someone who had done this before, who had stood behind this counter and made people feel small, and never once faced a consequence for it. Then she turned to the officers, and she said the thing that sealed everything. The thing that Simone's camera caught perfectly, clearly, without any possibility of misinterpretation. The thing that would be replayed 4 million times in the next 24 hours on screens across the country. "Look," Brenda's voice was flat, almost bored. "I've been in banking for 14 years. I know what a legitimate, high-value account holder looks like, and I'm telling you, she doesn't fit. She just doesn't fit the profile." The lobby stopped breathing. Every sound seemed to drop away. The jazz, the distant phone calls, the soft shuffle of feet on marble. Everything reduced to that one sentence, hanging in the air above the teller counter, like something that couldn't be taken back. Because it couldn't. It was out now. It had been recorded. It had been heard by 2 police officers, a lobby full of witnesses, and a camera that had been running for the last 11 minutes. The younger officer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Simone's thumb moved slightly on her phone, zooming in. The man in the gray suit, the one who had been so carefully avoiding involvement, finally looked up from the floor. His expression had changed. He'd heard it. He understood exactly what it meant. And for the first time since this began, he looked genuinely ashamed of his own silence. Whitney looked at Brenda. She looked at Hartley. She looked at Carl, still positioned 2 feet to her left, like a prop in a scene he hadn't fully understood until this moment. She looked at the 2 officers. She looked briefly at every single person in that lobby who had watched this unfold from the beginning and chosen repeatedly to say nothing. Then she reached into the front sleeve of her portfolio, the sleeve where she had kept something she hadn't shown anyone yet. Something she always carried, not because she had planned for a moment like this, but because she had learned a long time ago that preparation wasn't paranoia, it was survival. She placed it on the counter, and the entire room changed. It was a single document, folded once, printed on heavy paper with an embossed header at the top, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than most people's lunch. Whitney unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and laid it flat on the counter between her documents and Brenda's hands. Nobody moved. The older officer leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough to read the header. Brenda looked down at it. Her expression didn't change immediately. It took 3 full seconds. 3 seconds of reading, of the words registering, of her brain refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing, before the color began to leave her face. Hartley couldn't see it from where he was standing. He took 1 step closer, then another. Then he stopped. The document was a purchase and acquisition agreement, signed, notarized, dated 48 hours ago, governing the full acquisition of Premier Trust Bank and all its subsidiary branches by Elevation Capital Group. The acquiring party, Elevation Capital Group. The signatory, Whitney Evans, CEO. Beneath her signature, in clean, typed letters, Effective ownership transfer pending regulatory approval. All operational authority recognized from date of signing. Whitney let them read. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The document spoke with the kind of authority that 14 years behind a teller window couldn't prepare you for, and 30 years of branch management couldn't outrank. Hartley's hand came up and gripped the edge of the counter. Not dramatically, just the involuntary reach of a man whose legs have suddenly become uncertain about their job. Brenda's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Whitney looked at them both. Then she spoke, quietly, without heat, without triumph in her voice, just clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from knowing exactly who you are in a room full of people who just found out they were wrong. My name is Whitney Evans. I am the founder and CEO of Elevation Capital Group. As of 48 hours ago, this bank belongs to my company. Every account in this building, every policy on that computer, every procedure you just put me through, all of it now falls under my authority. She paused. Let that land. I came here today alone, without announcement, without my legal team, without a single person who knew my name. I came to make a $30,000 withdrawal for a charitable donation I make every year. I came as a customer, because I wanted to see how this branch treated its customers when nobody important was watching. Another pause. Now I know. The lobby was absolutely silent. The jazz had stopped, or maybe no one could hear it anymore over the sound of everything shifting. The younger officer had straightened up completely. His partner had taken a small, almost imperceptible step back, the way people do when they realize they've been standing on the wrong side of something. Carl Norris, the security guard who had been positioned at Whitney's left for the better part of 20 minutes, quietly moved away from her. Not running, just stepping back, creating distance between himself and the position he'd held so confidently 10 minutes ago. Simone lowered her phone from recording position, slowly. She looked at the screen for a moment, at the footage, at the timestamp, at the crystal clear audio of Brenda's words still visible in the waveform. Then she looked up at Whitney. Her expression was somewhere between stunned and deeply, deeply satisfied. The man in the gray suit, the one who had studied the floor, who had looked away, who had decided repeatedly that this wasn't his problem, was staring now with the wide, hollow look of someone recalculating a series of choices they made in the last 40 minutes. Whitney reached into her portfolio one final time. She removed a business card, simple, heavy stock, embossed letters, and placed it on top of the acquisition document. I'll be contacting the board this afternoon. I'll also be requesting a full audit of this branch's transaction records for the past 24 months, with specific attention to verification procedures and how they have been applied across different customer demographics. She looked at Brenda directly. Every interaction at this window, every flag, every request for additional documentation, all of it. Brenda's hand was trembling. It was subtle, just a fine vibration in the fingers gripping the edge of the counter, but it was there. 14 years behind this window. 14 years of small decisions, small dismissals, small cruelties performed with the confidence of someone who never expected to answer for them. That confidence was gone now. It had left the building the moment Whitney unfolded that piece of paper. Hartley finally found his voice. It came out smaller than he intended. Ms. Evans, on behalf of the branch, I want to... Mr. Hartley. Whitney picked up her documents, slid them back into the portfolio, closed it. You'll hear from my legal team before 5 o'clock. She looked at the two officers. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. I hope the rest of your morning is less eventful. Then she turned to the teller window, not Brenda's window, but the one next to it, where a younger teller had been standing frozen for the last several minutes, eyes wide, not breathing, and said simply, "I'd like to make my withdrawal now, please. $30,000. Cash." The young teller moved immediately. No hesitation, no flags, no phone calls. Just two hands, shaking slightly, counting out $30,000 as fast as they possibly could. The cash was counted, confirmed, and handed over in a white envelope with the Premier Trust logo embossed on the front. Whitney took it, slid it into her portfolio, and zipped it closed. One clean motion, like she'd just completed a routine errand, which, from her perspective, she had. She turned from the window. The lobby was still quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a professional space doing its work, the airless, suspended quiet of a room full of people who had just witnessed something they couldn't unsee and weren't sure yet what to do with it. Hartley was still standing near the counter. His pocket square was slightly crooked now. Nobody had noticed it happening, but somewhere in the last 10 minutes it had shifted, that small, careful detail he'd maintained for 30 years, slightly undone. He opened his mouth as Whitney turned to leave. "Ms. Evans." His voice came out careful, measured, the voice of a man who has spent a career managing situations and is now trying to manage the worst one of his life. "I want to express, on behalf of this branch, how deeply sorry I am for any misunderstanding," Whitney said. She didn't stop walking. She said it over her shoulder, without turning around, without breaking stride. Just the one word, hanging in the air behind her, like a question she already knew the answer to. Hartley closed his mouth. Brenda hadn't moved from behind the counter. She was gripping its edge with both hands now, like it was the only solid thing in the room. Her face had gone from pale to a deep, mottled flush, the particular color of someone whose body is processing shame faster than their mind can keep up. She didn't try to speak. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. Simone stood up from her chair as Whitney passed. She held out her phone, screen facing up, the video paused on a clear frame of Brenda's face mid-sentence. She didn't say much, just, "I got all of it, from the beginning." Whitney stopped, looked at the screen, looked at Simone. Something passed between them. Not a smile exactly, but a recognition. The particular understanding of two people who both know what it costs to stand in certain rooms. "Send it to this address," Whitney said, and recited her office email without reaching for a card. "Don't post it anywhere yet." Simone nodded, already typing. The two officers were near the door. The younger one stepped forward slightly as Whitney approached. He looked uncomfortable in the specific way of someone who has just replayed the last 40 minutes in their head and doesn't like what they see. "Ms. Evans," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. We shouldn't have come in the way we did." Whitney looked at him. It wasn't a warm look, but it wasn't hostile either. "I know you were called," she said. "What matters is what you do with what you saw." She walked out through the front door, into the Atlanta morning, into the sound of traffic and birds and a city that had no idea what had just happened inside that marble lobby. She walked to her slate gray sedan, unlocked it, sat down, placed the portfolio on the passenger seat. And for a moment she just sat there, hands in her lap, engine off, looking at nothing in particular through the windshield. She was not shaking. She had trained herself out of shaking in moments like this a long time ago. But the energy of the last hour sat heavily in her chest. The specific exhaustion of having to be perfectly composed while being treated as less than nothing. Of having to measure every breath and every word and every movement because the cost of imperfection, for someone who looked like her, in a room like that, was never just embarrassment. She took one long breath, let it out slowly. Then she picked up her phone and called Alicia Barnes. Alicia answered on the second ring. "Whitney, everything okay?" "Schedule it," Whitney said. "All of it. I want this documented, I want it filed, and I want it done before the end of the week." A brief pause. Then Alicia's voice, calm and clear. "I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning." Back inside Premier Trust Bank, Douglas Hartley was on the phone with the regional director. His voice was low. His office door was closed. By the time he hung up, 20 minutes later, both he and Brenda Calloway had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending internal review. They would not return to that branch. The video went live 36 hours later. Whitney had spent that time with Alicia Barnes, going through every detail, the timeline, the witnesses, the names, the exact sequence of events from the moment she stepped through Premier Trust's front door to the moment she walked out. They documented everything. Alicia filed formal complaints with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the state banking regulator, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission before close of business the following day. Then Whitney made one phone call to Simone. 2 words. Post it. The clip was 18 seconds at its most shared. Brenda's voice, flat and certain. "I know what a legitimate high-value account holder looks like, and I'm telling you, she doesn't fit." Then the camera panning to Whitney's face, composed, steady, holding something in her expression that was harder to look at than anger. Something that looked like a person deciding, very quietly, that enough was enough. 4 million views in 24 hours, 11 million by the end of the week. The comments came in waves. First, disbelief, then recognition. The particular recognition of people who had experienced the same thing in different rooms, different cities, different counters, and had never had a camera running. "This happened to my mother last year. This happened to me at a car dealership in 2019. This happens every single day, and nobody films it." The stories multiplied faster than anyone could count them. Trevor Hollis led his evening segment with it on Wednesday. The Chiron read, "Bank calls police on black CEO mid-withdrawal. She owns the bank." His panel that night included a civil rights attorney, a former federal banking regulator, and a behavioral economist who had spent 15 years studying racial bias in financial services. They didn't need to speculate. The video made the case without any help. Premier Trust's communications team issued a statement Thursday morning. They called it an isolated incident and expressed their deep commitment to serving all customers with dignity and respect. The statement was written in the careful, bloodless language of corporate crisis management. Every word chosen to acknowledge without admitting, to apologize without accepting responsibility. It backfired within hours. Former customers began posting their own experiences under the hashtag #PremierTrust. Not just black customers, though there were many, but elderly customers who had been asked for excessive documentation, disabled customers who had been spoken over and around, anyone who had ever stood at one of those marble counters and been made to feel like they didn't belong there. The hashtag reached trending status by Thursday afternoon. 3 corporate clients, firms with combined deposits exceeding $200 million, publicly announced formal reviews of their banking relationships with Premier Trust by the end of the week. 2 of them quietly initiated transfer proceedings the following Monday. Premier Trust stock dropped 8% in the first 48 hours. By the end of the second week, it had not recovered. The formal investigations moved quickly, partly because the evidence was so clean. Simone's video, the branch's own internal camera footage, which had captured everything from a second angle. The transaction records, which showed clearly, in the bank's own data, that 3 white customers had made comparable withdrawals on the same morning as Whitney, with standard single ID verification and no fraud flags raised. 3 transactions, same amount, same branch, same day, completely different procedure. Alicia Barnes put that data in front of a federal judge in a civil rights filing that cited the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The judge did not dismiss it. Douglas Hartley's deposition took 4 hours. He arrived with a personal attorney and a prepared statement. He left having been unable to answer a single question about why police escalation was warranted for a customer who had raised no disturbance and broken no rule. He couldn't produce a policy document that required it. He couldn't name a single comparable situation where it had been done to a white customer. His attorney objected 17 times. It didn't help. Brenda Calloway's deposition was shorter and worse. Under oath, she was asked directly, at what point did she flag the account before completing verification? Her answer, when it finally came, was the one that ended her career in banking permanently. When she walked up to the window, Brenda said, something just didn't seem right. Something just didn't seem right. Not the documents, not the transaction history, not the account balance, not anything that appeared on the screen in front of her. Just the person standing at her window. Just what she saw when she looked up. The civil case settled 4 months after the incident. The full terms were sealed, but what was confirmed publicly was enough. Premier Trust paid a substantial financial settlement to Whitney Evans. Both Hartley and Brenda were formally terminated, not resigned, not retired, terminated, and barred from client-facing roles in any Premier Trust affiliate. The bank was required to implement a new transparent verification policy, applied uniformly across all customers, regardless of any subjective assessment. Mandatory bias training, bank-wide, within 90 days. Quarterly compliance reviews submitted to the state regulator for 3 consecutive years. And then there was the censure. The state banking regulator issued Premier Trust a formal censure, a public, official finding of institutional misconduct, the first in the bank's 60-year history. It was entered into the public record and would remain there permanently. Anyone who searched Premier Trust's regulatory history from that point forward would find it. Every auditor, every partner institution, every prospective client who did their due diligence would see it. Whitney gave one interview, sat across from a journalist she had known for years, in a conference room in her own building, and spoke for 20 minutes without notes. She was not angry. She was not performing forgiveness either. She was simply precise. I didn't do this because of the $30,000, she said. I have $30,000 in my car right now. I did this because the next person they treat that way might not have an acquisition agreement in their portfolio. They'll just have their dignity. And that should have been enough. It should have been enough from the very beginning. That clip ran on every major network. Some of them ran it twice. The journalist asked her one final question. Did she think anything would actually change? Whitney was quiet for a moment. Then, I think change doesn't happen because people suddenly become better. I think it happens because the cost of not changing becomes too high to ignore. We just made the cost very clear. 6 months after that Tuesday morning, Whitney Evans walked into a community center on the west side of Atlanta and handed a white envelope to a woman named Dorothy Green, who had run the Westside Community Foundation for 11 years on a budget that was never quite enough. $30,000. Cash. Same as every year. Dorothy didn't know where it came from. She never did. That was the point. The foundation used it to launch a financial literacy program for first-generation college students, kids from Vine City, from Mechanicsville, from the same streets Whitney had grown up on. The program taught them how to read a contract, how to open an investment account, how to walk into a bank and know their rights. It was called simply the Know Your Worth program. By the end of its first year, it had served 214 students. Elevation Capital Group moved its corporate accounts, all of them, every dollar, to Greenwood Bank, a Black-owned financial institution based in Atlanta. The move was reported by Forbes, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. Whitney didn't hold a press conference about it. She didn't post about it. She just moved the money and went back to work. Within 3 months, 6 other firms had followed. Combined, they represented over $400 million in transferred deposits. Greenwood Bank announced a significant expansion of its small business lending program shortly after. Simone, the woman who had kept her phone steady and her nerves steadier in that lobby, declined a job offer from Elevation Capital Group's communications team. Graciously, warmly, with a handwritten note that Whitney kept on her desk. Simone was starting her own media company, a platform focused on documenting civil rights incidents in real time and connecting affected individuals with legal resources before the news cycle moved on. Whitney wrote her a personal check for the startup costs. No cameras, no press release. Just money going where it was needed, from someone who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. Premier Trust Bank survived the scandal. New leadership, new compliance team, new language on their website about inclusion and belonging. Whether those words represented genuine transformation or carefully managed optics was something only time and the quarterly regulatory reviews would answer. Douglas Hartley spent 8 months looking for a position at another financial institution. None of the interviews went past the second round. His name appeared in the regulatory filing. It always came up. Brenda Calloway did not return to banking. The last anyone heard, she had moved to another state. Whether she understood, truly understood, what she had done, not just the professional consequences, but the human cost of 14 years of small decisions made from behind a teller window, that was something nobody could know from the outside. Some reckonings happen publicly, in courtrooms, in headlines, in regulatory filings entered into the permanent record. Others happen quietly, in private, in the middle of the night, when there's no policy manual to hide behind, and no manager to call, and no counter to grip. Those are the ones that take the longest, and the ones that matter most. Whitney never spoke about that morning as a victory. Not once. In any interview, in any conversation anyone reported. She spoke about it as a data point, as evidence, as one documented instance of something that happened every day to people whose names never made the news and whose stories never trended. She spoke about it as a reason to keep building. The Know Your Worth program is still running. It expanded to 3 additional cities in its second year. The curriculum includes a module on banking rights, specifically what a customer is legally entitled to, what constitutes discriminatory treatment, and exactly what to do, step by step, if it happens to you. Whitney wrote that module herself, on a Sunday afternoon, without announcement. So here's what I want to leave you with, and I want your honest answer in the comments. Not about Whitney, not about Brenda or Hartley or the outcome of the case. About the lobby, about the moment before any of it was resolved, when a woman was standing at a counter, being told she didn't belong, and the room was full of people who saw it and said nothing. What would you have done? If this story hit something real in you, share it, because the conversation it starts is the whole point. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.